Welcome back to another Ziti TV. Today is March 28th, 2025. Um, Pulled this Ziti TV together relatively quickly, like I usually do. I hope you enjoy the spur of the moment sort of live streams, but that's what this is about. It's a tiny bit planned, but this one's not exclusively planned, as most Ziti TVs are. What we're going to do now is we're going to go through the actually let's pop up this. Hey, there it is. Oh, congratulations to me. I've figured out how to solve the vignette that was over last week's ZD TV, and so very sorry that you have to look at that. But apparently, two of my three monitors a-okay to share. One of the monitors not so great. Who knows why? Hardware, it's like in the old days when you had to find the right driver and make sure it worked, as opposed to it just worked. All right, so we're gonna do a ZDTV. We're going to look at what we did in the first part one of the learning OpenZiti, and we're going to move away from using the ZD Edge Quickstart. We tried it out. We said we like it. We got our configuration. It's all set up. And now we want to move it to a more stable type of environment. And so that's what we're going to do today. And when I was going through this, I thought it would be educational, mostly because we're going to change the way we SSH. If you remember in part one, and you know what? I'm going to take a note to make diagram. So I'm going to have some diagrams that I can share for this too, because it'll be nice to see the progression of how the overlay progresses. In part one, we had an SSH service that was all local. We had one container emulating one virtual machine, emulating one physical machine. And we used that one container to start a quick start, ZD Edge quick start. And from that quick start, we have a controller and we have a router all in one little environment. And that's fantastic for quick dev work. And so we also had that container with SSH running, so we could SSH to localhost using zero trust host access for SSH. And so now we're going to split the containers into two different containers, emulating having a VPS in one place being your controller and a VPS in another place being your router. Now, in this case, I'm going to put them on the same network. That is not strictly necessary, but for right now, they're going to be part of the same network. And then we'll add a third container to this mix, and that third container will be our SSH target. And so we'll have to SSH from my computer, your computer, wherever computer, through the OpenZiti router into the SSH target. And so that's what we plan to do today. Now, I don't have the notes all typed up. I do have a generic set of notes. So in this case, we'll just have to follow along and go from there. So let's start off by taking a look at, let's see, do I have part one? I think this is part one. Am I in part one? Yeah. And so from part one, if we look at our directory, we had a few files, one of which was the compose file. And this is the one that we're going to look at right now. And this compose file had that controller, and that controller ran, where is the command? Ports, environment, hostname, volumes, Ubuntu. Oh, this controller runs SSH. And the reason it did that was so that we could come in here and do a Docker compose up and get the fake environment running. And that lets us do a Docker compose. Am I in? I am Docker compose exec interactively into the controller and run bash. And then once we were here, we were able to run a command that runs the quick start. And the quick start, we learned, goes through, makes a whole PKI for you if you have a few things set correctly, like this external DNS, the controller advertised address, and runs all this stuff for you and emits all the config files that you need. All right, and so that's what we did last time. And so if we go through and look at the OpenZiti Ziti TV directory here, I don't believe we went through these last week, but what you can see is we have a YAML file. That's the wrong YAML file. I want controller. We have a controller.yaml file, and we have a router quickstart.yaml file. We'll also see this yaml.proto.gzip, not relevant for today, but we'll take a look at all these other files. Let's start with addressing the CAs, the cert, the JWT, the key, and the cert chain. And those are all relevant to the router file. Did I type it wrong? Am I there's certain all right, let's cat it and see what happens. Did I what have I just done? I changed to Ziti TV, right? CD OpenZiti. Did I CD to someplace I didn't know I did? All right. I don't know what I did. What did I do? What did I go wrong? I don't know. I don't know how I went wrong. All right, whatever. Let's look at. I never CD'd there. I just LL'd there. That's why. Okay, cool. All right. So if we look at the router configuration file, the first thing you'll notice this identity block. You'll see it has /OpenZiti, ZDTV, router quickstart cert, key, and CAs. And so when you enroll a router, the first time you enroll it, these files will be emitted on your behalf. So the quick start puts them all in one folder. But if you were to make your own configuration for a router, you could choose where to put these. And if we have time, we're going to do that later. We're going to make a second router pretending it's our home router. All right. You'll see the advertised address for the controller, the advertised port. Remember, we use 6700 and 6701. And that's why these files are in this particular location. If we look at the controller.yaml, you can see it also has a identity block, but it uses the PKI directory. And so this is just a nomenclature that the ZD CLI follows. If you set a ZD underscore PKI underscore root environment, all uppercase environment variable, it'll put your emitted files into the place that you want. And when you run the quick start, it sets that PKI root, creates the root CA, creates the intermediate CA, creates the two creates the key and the cert, and as well as the chain, and puts them all in the right places. So the ZDCLI can create your PKI for you, and that's what the Quickstart did, and that's great. But running this big command, where's that big command? Running this big command every time is kind of it's kind of extra, right? So let's go through and let's modify our environment so that it is not going to be quite so ugly. Now, to do that, we're actually going to go to part 2, because in part 2, we're building on part 1, right? So we don't modify part 1. And inside of part 2, you'll see I'm going to, in fact, let's see, git status. Do I have git add compose? I can push what I have right now in case anybody is interested in following along. I think the README is okay for me to push. I don't think there's, I mean, this is just going to be junk for right now. Well, it's not junk, but I mean, it's like not complete. Git add readme, git add connect to SSH target. And then I don't care about set prompt. Git commit -m minor part 2 updates. Git push. All right. So now everything I have is live and up to date. We can look at it all together. If we look at the README, you can see there's not a whole lot in here right now. But this is going to be the separating from the quick start guide. So that's why it's called part 2, separating from the quick start. And so first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a backup of our OpenZiti volume. And this is only in case you want to go back to where you started from, right? Like, maybe you don't need this. That's up to you. But let's go ahead and do that. And now I'm going to have a hard time doing this. Yeah. All right. So I also have this whole entire environment mounted through VS Code. And so hopefully this is going to be legible. I'm going to try to do it over here because, VI is great and all, but if I could use a clicky UI where I can copy and paste some things, I find that to be a bit more intuitive at times. So if I flip back and forth like this, that's where I'm going to. I'm going to VS Code, and I'm not a VS Code wizard, so I don't know how to shrink the the left side, but whatever. I guess we'll just have to deal with that. Okay, and I can't make it any bigger. There it goes. Make it just a tiny bit bigger. So let's do the volume create. And I think I've already run this command. So let's do a docker volume ls. What did I call it? Learn star. Does that work? Oh, of course it doesn't work. Pipe grep learn. There we go. Okay, so I do have a learn OpenZiti part 1. So I'm going to do a docker volume rm learn OpenZiti part 1. All right, so there goes that volume. And then I can just copy and paste these commands. You can see what it does is it just copies from the OpenZiti volume mount to the learn OpenZiti volume mount after you create it. And so that's all this is going to do. Let's go ahead and back up that OpenZiti partition or volume. There we go. As a reminder, here's where our URL is going to be for our controller. And so now we're going to create or convert our Quickstart over to individual containers. And so the first thing we need to do is let's look at the compose file that's in part 2 here. So if we look at this compose file, you'll see I've added a new network. And that new network is going to represent your home or any other network, really. But basically, Docker will isolate different containers on different networks. And so this is going to be a nice way for us to have anything in the home network not be able to communicate to anything in the OpenZiti network. I've made a new service called controller, and it's going to run the same Ubuntu instance for now. And it runs one command. I've also condensed quite a bit of this. Because you've already created all your config files, a fair number of the environment variables are not necessary if you're going to be able, running and maintaining your own configuration. And so for this series, that's what we're going to do because this is a learning series. So that's what you're going to see. The restart unless stopped is probably not necessary because we're just starting and stopping these things manually. You'll see I have removed or moved, I guess, the router's advertised port. In part 1, the router's advertised port and the controller's advertised port were both in the same container. Obviously, that's no good when we have another router service down here. And so that's all there is to it. We know the path to our controller's configuration file, and we just run zd controller run and that configuration file. Same thing for the router. I'm going to run Ubuntu. We're going to use the same volume, and we're going to map all the advertised addresses. Oh, I didn't talk about the advertised addresses. So this is just so that when you go into the container, it will show you a nice ZD at controller versus ZD at router, and the ports too. And then the last thing we've done is we've added the SSH target. And so if you remember, as we did before, we had all these containers run SSHD with the express purpose of letting us SSH into that container. Not a particularly useful Docker container, but for education's purpose, it's going to fit our build just quite nicely. Excuse me. Since these other containers are no longer running SSHD, they're going to be running the Ziti CLI directly. They're not going to be running SSHD. So we need another target for us to SSH to. And this is where we're going to get into Zero Trust Network Access. So as we've discussed the last time, but as a reminder, if I pop up the docs and we look Control K for ZTHA, as a reminder, ZTAA application access is when your application embeds a Zero Trust OpenZiti SDK directly into it. Host access is when you run a tunneling device on an entire operating system and you trust the host network, and the application that it connects to is all from the host's perspective, the trust for the host. Whereas network access means you're going to have to traverse an actual network from one machine to another machine in order to get where you're going. Because we've put the SSH target into the same network, it's network access. It might not seem like it, but we're going to be traversing an internal network, and in this case, it's Docker. So, it's kind of all one network. But If this were, say, a VPC in Amazon land, you could see this being two different virtual machines, and you wanted to SSH from the router into that, you know, kind of like a DMZ, I guess you could consider ZD in that case, like a DMZ, where you're SSHing through the router to another machine that's on the other side. Sort of works like a bastion. All right, and so that's what we're going to do. And in order to do that, we need to have an SSH target. And so this third container runs an SSH target. And then if we have time, which, we're already at 15 minutes, but I think it'll be all right, we're going to just try to whip up a whole other home router on a whole other network, on this home network. So this router would not be able to access the SSH target. And so that's a lot of preamble. Let's go ahead and Docker compose. Oh, actually, I didn't make a start, but I started to do Docker compose project name part 2, and then up. Let me down it first to make sure. Okay. So if you give it the project name, the only reason I gave it a project name like this is because when you run the up, already allocated. So I've screwed something up already. Fantastic. This worked like 20 minutes ago, but well, that's just how it's going to be sometimes. It's because part 1 is running, isn't it? So let's do a Docker compose. That was a part 2 down minus v, and then let's go back to part 1, which I think is still allocated is the problem. Let's force that. Part 1, Docker compose down minus v. There we go. And now let's go back to part 2 and do our up command. Now we shouldn't get, there we go. There we go. Now we don't get arguments. Okay, and now you see a whole bunch more extra stuff is going by, and you see the green and you see the blue, because we have two different containers running, and so everything came up, everything's stable, which is what we hoped to see. And if we remember Bob, good old Bob, let's make sure Bob is still connected. So here's my ZT Desktop Edge for Windows. Good old Bob has a part1.ssh. And someday, I promise you, Windows users will make this legible because it's just so tiny. It's so hard to see. So we still have a part1.ssh service. But remember, that service is SSHing to the controller, what used to be the controller's router, and then back to SSHD, giving you access to that one machine running the controller. That's no longer the case. We now have 3 different machines, all in Docker, remember. And we have a router that is not running on the controller, and we have a target. So now we have to SSH from which one was the router? From the router to the target. In order to do that, we're going to have to change our service. So as that reminder was there, where's my, that's the wrong one. Read me. That's why this reminder is here for you and for me. That is the URL that we need to get to. So I'll go ahead and, if I can click it, if I can find, okay, it's opening up somewhere. We see it down there. All right. How many times did it open? So here is the controller, Zach. And I don't remember what my password is, but I saved it. So thankfully. And so now I'm connected. I would really want this to say never. Why don't I say never? And so here we are. We have our Zach again open. We look at our services. We wanted to SSH to Docker. When we come here, we can see configurations, SSH to Docker host, SSH to Docker intercept. Intercept, of course, being my local computer. So if I click on this, you'll see part1.ssh. Let's change this, make this part2 SSH because we are on part 2. We'll save that. And after, well, by the time I find the ZDU, I'm sure it'll be there because it took me forever. There it is. Part2.ssh. Okay, so now that says part2.ssh. Cool. And then SSH to Docker host. Oh no, I've already done this. This is supposed to say 127.0.0.1. I forgot. I backed up the wrong backup. This is what it used to say. It used to say 127.0.0.1. But instead, we need to now give this the actual name of the computer or the IP address. Actually, maybe that would be a better way to do it. I can come into not here. Now we need a new environment. So let's see. We're gonna change to part 2, And then we need, the connect tos might be useful. Connect to SSH target. And so now I'm connected to the SSH target. I could do a IP adder and find my 172 type IP address that's going to be in here. This one right there. And so this IP address should be accessible. Now, I'm not the biggest Docker pro, but I'm pretty sure this is correct. So instead of using SSH target, which you could totally use, but since I've already cheated and had it there, I wanted to just show you you could use an IP address as well. And so now we should be all set if we've done everything correctly. This is not the one I want. This is the one I want. From my home computer, let's go to, let's just go back to temp and clear. I should be able to SSH to Ziti at, it was called part2.ssh. Oh, but I won't be able to. And then it'll say, do you want to connect? I say, yes. This is the normal SSH handshake. And you can see permission denied because I forgot to do one thing very important. So if we go back to that machine and CD to learn Ziti and CD to part 2 and connect to SSH target, we'll see if we go back and read the README, you have to make a directory SSH because this is a Docker container. I haven't done any of this. I mentioned before I had squirreled off my pub key on the OpenZiti volume so that I could do this the next time around. And you have to chmod it so that it's only accessible to that user. And so let's go ahead and make that directory, copy that file, and exit. And exit. Now I should be able to SSH to Ziti at part 2. And there you go. So that came through the Ziti router. Use Zero Trust Network access to go over to that SSH target. And we're here inside of Docker, inside of a virtual machine, inside of Amazon. And that was all done through Ziti, through building on the part 1 stuff. Okay, well, looks like we got through all of that, which is cool. So let's go ahead and try to add that second router. And this time we're going to do it live, as our friend Bill would say. I SSH'd from my local computer. So what I want to do is go back to the Ziti TV test machine here and CD to Ziti learning and CD to learn Ziti and CD to part 2. And from here, we need to now make a copy. Oh, we got a home router. We can connect to the home router. All right, so we're getting there. So now we can connect right to that home router. And this home router, if I were to try to SSH to SSH target, you can see it can't resolve that. Do I have no, I don't. Let's go back and get the IP address that we know worked 2 seconds ago from the router. If I were to SSH to that IP address, you can see there's no route to that router either, or to that SSH target. So we've effectively got 2 different networks in our little Docker environment. This home router is pretending to be an isolated router, but we need to install an OpenZiti router on this. And so let's see, if we go back and what are the steps? We're going to need to create a configuration file, and we're going to need to enroll a OpenZiti router, or create an OpenZiti router in the overlay, and then we're going to need to enroll it. And so as you can see, we are on the home router, which is not the one we need. So let's duplicate our window, make it big, SSH back to CD Xerox, just so we can get into this environment. CD to learn Ziti, part 2. And this time we're going to connect to the controller. And when we're in the controller, Ziti's on my path, but there's no code completion. One of the other things that is in the README that I'm going to make nicer is, let's see, make our lives easier right here. You can run this command. Okay, if I can copy it, I'll copy it that way. You can run this command and get Ziti tab completion. If you're not familiar with tab completion in Bash, boy, you should learn, because it makes your life so much easier. Because, for example, we can type cre and we get create, And we could say edge router. No, it's always ZD edge. ZD E for edge, C tab for create, ZD edge create, E D for edge router. And always ZD CLI commands have nice help. So ZD edge create edge router, we'll give it a name, home router. And now we'll look at our options. JWT output file, we're going to need to do that. So let's do a -o to home router.jwt. Home router, no traversal. We don't care about that right now. Role attributes. Let's give this some role attributes of home. And so that'll just actually, let's call it home network. We'll give it a little bit more descriptive. Home network. And then tunneler enabled. This one is an important one. Generally speaking, I find most people want tunneling enabled on their router. You can always start with it not being enabled and then update the router later if you want. But most people, it's just natural. People want to be able to do host-based ZD Zero Trust and or network-based Zero Trust, ZTNA. And so what will happen is invariably people will forget the -T or the -- tunneler enabled, and then show up in the forums and not know why it is that they can't intercept or can't offload traffic from their router. And so let's go ahead and create that router. Let's see. No identities found in CLI config. I didn't log in. Let's do a ZD edge login -u. In fact, I should have .zd user tap. No, do I have a password? Where are my environment variables? You'll have to give me one just quick second while I go do this off screen. env, I'm gonna env pipe. Come on, env pipe for grep for ZD underscore, and we're not sharing. There are no variables. Interesting. It's because I changed it around. All right, I see. I get it now. Okay. And so because of the work we're doing to split it out, if we go back to the compose file, I'm going to click on the right place. If we look at part 1, you can see we had all these environment variables set, and I forgot to include all of these environment variables, and so they're not there. If I'm not mistaken, let's see, I am mistaken. So I'm going to have to set these again off. Let me go off screen again. Just give me 2 shakes of a rabbit's tail, and I will find what I need. Cat.env, and find my password. Where is my password? Right there. All right. And then we'll come back into the controller, and then I will export ZD underscore PWD equals that, and then clear. And now I should be able to come back to here. All right. So now we have to, almost did it. ZD edge login -u. It was admin -p ZD PWD -y. So this will log you into the ZD CLI into the let's give it the actual. I don't know if I can do local host :6700. It might be 1280, right? 12. No, was it 6700? We'll find out. And then username, admin, password is that password. All right, cool. And if you see the saving identity default, that means you logged in. So now we're good to go. Let's do a reverse search for home ZD edge create edge router home router. And so now that's what we're going to run again. This time you can see we had a success. New edge router created. If we take a look, we should have a new file called home router.jwt, and we do. And so now we need to get this file from one Docker container to another. Usually you would SSH this. Instead, I'm going to Docker copy. From, actually, can I do a Docker compose copy? I've never tried that. Docker compose copy from controller. I can paste and home router. Does it tab complete? Nope. Router.jwt to the SSH target. Is that what I want? No. Home router. To the home router. That works. Okay. I guess we got to do it the hard way. So we copy it out to the local machine. No container found. Okay, we're going to do it the hard way. Docker copy. This is going to be part 2 controller and then all this same stuff. Okay, and so now we can Docker copy the home router JWT to part 2 home router dot. All right. Okay, so you had to do it the hard way. Now let's connect to the home router. And when we're inside of here, I thought did I connect it? Did I copy it wrong? No, copied it to the right place. PWD, find / name home router.jwt. Okay, so I thought dot would go to my home directory, but apparently it went to the root directory. Don't quite know why. Doesn't matter to me. Move home router to here. Of course, is it owned by root? That's owned by Ubuntu. All right, so the Ubuntu has a sudo, so we'll just chone this over to Ziti home router, and now we can move this to here. LL home router Ziti read write. I guess does it need execute? Chmod 700,000 to home router. Sudo chmod, and then can we move it? What am I missing here? Cannot move home router to /home router. Where? I mean, pwdl. Do I not? I have. Oh, root is .. I mean, my Linux foo is not particularly good. So let's go to home Ziti home router.jwt. Really? Why? What? Can I touch a.text? What did I screw up? Can I cat home router? Anybody? Let me see. Oh, so let's see. Joel says, just say, hey, great job. And these videos help a lot. Thank you so much, Joel. It's very nice to hear. If you know what I'm doing wrong with respect to this Linux permission problem, let me know. Copy home route. I'm going to just do it again. I just want to see. Oh, I copied it. I didn't move it. All right. So there must be something going on that I just don't understand. Okay, whatever. Let's moving on. Sorry. Moving on. All right. So now we have our JWT. Now we have to create a config file. The ZD CLI, did I have my bash completion? I didn't. So let's do that bash completion. Source ZD completion bash. And so now on this machine, I should be able to do and if you want, you can add this to your bash. Is there a bash RC? Yeah. You can add that right to your bash RC. And what's nice about that is the next time you connect, you'll have your tab completion because bash RC happens every time you log in. So let's see what we were doing. We're going to create a config file. So we can do ZD create config edge. Let's create config, right? Let's see, create config router. Yeah, edge. Okay. So now we can do a ZD create config router edge. A little long, but I mean, if you have the tab completion, really easy. And when we do that, you see we need to supply a router name, the home router, and we can supply other options at that time. Tunneler mode, none host tproxy. Tproxy is very helpful if you wish for this router to be able to intercept services. We'll get to that later on because that's a more advanced part. But one of the really cool things Ken discovered is that you can assign a Docker container as the network of another Docker container and kind of merge the two networks together, which is exactly how Kubernetes works when it comes to okay, not exactly how, but I mean like the same conceptual idea when it comes to a Kubernetes pod. And why that's so neat is we'll be able to do interesting things all in this little Docker world by leveraging the intercept capability of a router. And we'll do that later. So we're going to create the config. And when we create this config, you'll see that it outputs it to the screen, which is fine. And we have an opportunity to inspect it and make some decisions. Do we want the home directory to be here? Well, maybe not. The CLI, another thing you could do if you're interested, the create config has an environment command, which will show you a plethora of environment variables that you can use to customize the config generator. And this is useful, and this is the Quickstart uses a lot of these things. This is useful to be able to override certain values, like say the controller's address or the port that you want to use or whatever you want. One of the ones that you can set is actually the Ziti home dir. So let's just take a look at export Ziti home equals, let's go OpenZiti, and we'll call this home router. And so if I were to run the config command again, this time let's just use head minus say 30. And you'll see that the directory that's being referenced is now this directory. If you remember, we talked about before, when you create your first router, when you create a router, and when you enroll it, that directory is where these locations are where files will be written. So I can now make a directory called that. And let's see if I did it right. I should be able to Ziti edge, Ziti router enroll. Now, if we do the help, we can see it takes a config file and then it will take a JWT. So we give it a config file. We haven't written our config file. So let's go ahead and create that config file. Let's write out that config file into, did I make the directory? OpenZiti, the home router. All right. So we'll write it out to home. I'm going to have to move me. Maybe, let's see, not the big one. Can I move it up here? That's the wrong way to do it. I wanted to hide it. I got to do this real quick. All right. Home router.yaml. Okay, and so I can pop myself back on the screen, maybe. So now we wrote the file, and so now we can copy, I can't quite see, cat that file, paste it over here. All right, now we should be able to run our Ziti router enroll, give it that file, and then the JWT is the home router? Okay, home router.jwt. And you'll see it tries to connect to the controller, and thankfully we did everything right. Registration complete. If we look at that home OpenZiti, the home router, if we look in there, as advertised, you now have certs, keys, cert, CAs, and you have a router file or a configuration file. And again, if everything goes well, which I don't think it will, so I'm hopeful that this fails. So, all right, ready? Precursor. This should fail. If we run a Ziti router run, and we give it that configuration file, which is right there. When we run this, I expect it to come online, but I expect the links between the routers to not work. So let's see. Let's do a Ziti edge list. ERs or edge routers. No code completion. So source Ziti completion bash. In fact, I am lazy, and so that will go right into my bash RC. As I said before, it is there. I just didn't source it apparently. Oh, it's an old terminal. I see. I'm on the home router. Besides, that's not what I want. I want to be on the controller. oops, exit and then connect. And now I have my Ziti, Edge, login. Yeah. Oh, I probably logged in from the other machine and I shouldn't have. I didn't know. I didn't notice that. Nobody caught me. So it's easy to do because it's one terminal. But in that bottom screen down there, I was actually on the home router and I logged in to the controller from it, but that was not what I intended to do. I thought I was in the controller. And so I'm pretty sure I'm not going to have the ZD uh, password on this terminal. So I got to go do the same little dance that I did before. ZD PWD equals that, and then clear. And then, actually, one more thing. Let me just make sure I can show you this. Yeah. All right, cool. One more thing is when I set that password, because I wanted to be able to reference it, I had to export it. So export ZD password equals blah, right? But if you put a space in front of your command, it won't go into your history. And so I actually added a space so that it wouldn't go into my history, just so that if I hit, the up arrow, you wouldn't see my password in there. And so thankfully, it's from an older command, which was way back then. It's still here. Let's see. All right. So now I can log in. Now, since I'm on the controller, I could use localhost. And before I wasn't able to. So now I can do a ZD Edge list edge routers. And you can see we have 2 edge routers. They're both online. You would think these guys would be connected. So we can test that. ZD, in this case, it's a fabric command, list links. And they are connected. It says that the home router is dialed to the acceptor, which is the Quickstart router. That's fantastic. And now that I think about it, I thought I was wrong, but I thought it wouldn't work, but it would work because the Quickstart uses one and only one port for there are 2 services that the router provides, and there are 2 services that the OpenZiti controller provides. On the controller, it's an HTTP-based API as well as a control plane for the overlay network. On the router, it is the link plane for routers to link to each other, and the edge plane for clients like my local client here. Where's the ZD Desktop Edge for Windows? This guy. For edge clients to connect to. So 2 different services, but the controller and the router support this thing called ALPN. I think it's like a protocol negotiation, application layer protocol negotiation. So when you ask for a connection, if you ask for it using an ALPN of like ZD link, it'll form a link. And if you ask for HTTP, it'll provide you the controller will provide you an HTTP response. And so the older quick starts, the stuff I did way back in the day, was on purpose overly complicated so that people could learn what was going on. Turns out that was just a terrible decision. Nobody really wanted to learn what was actually going on. They wanted a bit easier and then to go for, learn later as opposed to learn first. And so the quick start came about and works this way. And so now each of these, the controller and the router, both have one port, and now we have a link. So if I wanted to, and so actually, well, let's have some fun. Let's make a new service from the ZAC. And now this is going to be a new simple service, and this is going to be SSH to SSH target. No, router. This is what we call it, home router. That's what it was. SSH to home router. And so because we're running the router and because it has tunneling enabled, we can now SSH directly. And because the Ubuntu instance runs SSHD, we should be able to SSH into this router. And so let's go ahead and do that. So let's see. Let's access what identities can access this service. Let's call it part 2. Identity. So I'm going to copy that just so I don't have to type it again. What identities can host this service? I'm going to do the home router directly. Yeah, I'm going to do it directly. and then 127.0.0.1, port 22. Click save. Whoops. And then let's see, this will be home router.ssh 22. Save. Done. And now we go over to Bob and we'll wait for Bob to have. Oh, Bob's not going to have to. Anybody? Why won't Bob get this particular service? Yeah, because I used a different attribute for the service. So in the service, let's do part 2 and save that. If we look at this right here, you can see SSH to Docker had the roles of part 1, SSH to home router had the roles of part 2. When I authorized Bob to connect to SSH to Docker, I believe I did it using part 1. So let's go ahead and look at our policies now. And we see our part policies, the service, SSH to Docker, and part 1 identities. So any part 1 identity was able to dial the SSH to Docker service. All right. So let's go ahead and give Bob. Actually, let's give part two identities. I did. All right. Part 2 identities access to dial a particular service. Now let's see if Bob gets his second service. Did I do it right? And if I didn't, then we'll go ahead and do a quick Ziti command and find out, did I do this right? So it looks like I didn't. Let's come back to here. We'll run Ziti edge policy advisor identities minus Q. And we can see Bob has access to dial SSH to Docker. Oops, I screwed up. So you can look at it through Bob, or you can look at it through the policy advisor to find out whether Bob has access to the service or not. What did I screw up? Okay, so here's my dial policy. Oh, it's only SSH to Docker. Well, no wonder why Bob can't dial the other service, because I didn't give him SSH to home router. Silly me. Click save, come back over to here, click the policy advisor. Now you can see Bob has access to 2 services, and by this time, Bob should indeed have access to 2 services. All right, let's go back over to, let's exit this one and exit this one. And let's SSH to Ziti at, what was our intercept address? I don't remember. So I come to, it's over here. My mouse is going to be over here. I come to my configurations and my SSH. Now, mind you, when you use the simple form, you're going to get a lot of configs. You don't need this many configs. This is not, say, a best practice, but boy, it's easy. So when you're making 5, 10, 15 services, who cares? But when you're making hundreds of thousands of these things, you're going to want to probably learn how to condense them. And so when you come to the services page, you can see generally so far I'm using simple services, but we could always get into advanced services later on, let you do a whole bunch of extra stuff. It looks pretty much the same as the edit feature, which it is, but it doesn't do a lot of the niceties that the simple service does. Remember, this thing just makes 5 things on your behalf for you quickly and easily. But don't be surprised when you start seeing, a bajillion configs. It's because you're using simple service and you haven't grokked how to be fancier. You could condense all these things into one or a couple, maybe a few, right? Like, we can get into all that later on too. Okay, so let's see. What was I talking about? I was trying to SSH there, and I didn't know what my intercept config was. So SSH to the home router. The intercept config is home router.ssh. So home router.ssh. And it says port refused, but notice we did see something happened down here, right? Attempt refused, creating a route, attempt refused. Now, is SSHD running on this? Let's see, ps-ef pipe grep SSH. It's not. Did I start I started Ubuntu, right? Let's go look at the compose file. And wrong one, this one. Router, SSH target. Yeah. This should be running SSHD. I don't know what I did wrong in here. It's persistent. It says, this is also useful as troubleshooting, right? Learning how to troubleshoot OpenZiti. we could see the SSH connection comes in. You can very clearly see stuff. Let's do this. So it's clearer. You can clearly see stuff happened. You can see error creating route for blah, blah, blah. Connection refused, port 22. So this traffic made it all the way into the router. The router tried to offload to 127.0.0.1:22, and the connection was refused. So if I do an ss minus lntp pipe grep 22, SSHD is not running. How did I screw that up? I honestly, I do not know. I thought that the Ubuntu instance, where's our Docker file? Docker file is over. Docker file's over here. Docker file runs SSHD. Yeah, I really don't know how it's not running and how this container is still running. Like, that should work. No host keys. What did I do? How did I? I don't know how I made this SSH. I don't know why it's not working. Well, that should have worked anyway. Like, you get the traffic made it there. I just don't have SSHD listening on the other end. Well, we're at 50 minutes, and that was like, going out on a bummer. But you can see the traffic made it there. If I had SSHD running, it would have worked. And we would have rejoiced with such satisfaction. Instead, we're going to go home disappointed. I'm so sorry for that. Maybe next time we can figure out whatever it is that I screwed up here. Like actually, the last time I watched part one Ziti TV, and I fixed the problems from part one. So maybe I'll rewatch part two and make a little part two addendum as to what I screwed up and how exactly SSHD is not running on this Docker container, and yet how that Docker container is still running. Something must be running on this for it to ps minus pipe grep SSH. No. All right. I give up. I don't know. I'll figure it out. All right. That's Ziti TV for this week. Thanks everybody for hopping in. Thanks for the comments, the kind words, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.